Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to be yourself? Not in the poetic way, not in the philosophical way, but in the daily, grinding, silent way. The way you watch your own tone when you speak. The way you measure your laughter so it doesn't seem too loud or too quiet. The way you replay conversations later, wondering if you sounded strange, foolish, too intense, or not enough. There is a quiet tension that follows you, a subtle awareness of being seen, judged, evaluated. You may not speak of it, but you feel it, the pressure to hold yourself together. This is the ego. Not arrogance, not pride, but the fragile structure you built long before you knew what a self even was. Think back to childhood. The first time someone laughed when you didn't expect it. The first time someone called you too much, or too emotional, or too quiet. You didn't argue, you adapted. A mask was formed, not out of vanity, but out of survival. You learned to protect something tender inside you, something that felt too delicate to expose again. And now you live as the protector of that image. You defend your opinions because if they are wrong, what does that mean about you? You withdraw when you feel challenged because vulnerability feels dangerous. You compare yourself because your worth seems tethered to where you stand in the invisible hierarchy of everyone you know. You think you're defending yourself, but what you are actually defending is the version of you that was built to avoid pain. You get jealous, you get insecure, you feel replaced, unseen, overlooked. And every time this happens, you feel the panic rise because the ego believes that being diminished is a form of death. So it reacts, it fights, it hides, it performs, it wears the smile it doesn't feel. It nods at a joke that hurt a little. It says, "I'm fine," when something inside is quietly bleeding. But what if the self you are defending is not the self that is? Suffering? What if the one who is tired, overwhelmed, and aching beneath the surface is the real you, the one who never needed a mask at all? What if the ego isn't who you are, but only who you learn to be? This is not about destroying the ego. It is about seeing it the way you might see a shadow when you turn toward light. The journey ahead is not a battle. It is an unmasking, a remembering, a quiet stepping back into the person you were before the world told you who to be. And to understand how the mask was built, we must return to where it first began. Do you remember the first time you pulled yourself inward? The first time something in you decided it was safer not to be fully seen? You may not recall the day or the room or the faces around you, but your body remembers. The ego begins not as arrogance, but as a shield. It forms in the quiet spaces of childhood when love feels like something that can be gained or lost, depending on how well you behave, how softly speak, how little trouble you cause. You learned very early that being yourself was not always safe. Picture a child, maybe it was you, a child who laughs too loudly, asks too many questions, or cries when the world becomes too heavy. At first, everything is innocent, but then a sigh, a sharp tone, an impatient glance changes everything. Maybe someone said, "Stop crying, it's not that big of a deal," or "Why are you like this?" Maybe love was warm one moment and distant the next. Maybe approval came only when you were useful, quiet, impressive. And in that moment, something inside shifted, not drastically, but subtly, like a door closing 1 inch at a time. You learned to become what brought love, and to silence what brought rejection. Some children become the strong one, refusing to show weakness. Some become the achiever, trying to earn worth through perfection. Some become the peacekeeper, smoothing over conflict at the cost of their own needs. And some become the invisible one, believing that blending into the background is safer than risking being seen and misunderstood. These adaptations are not mistakes, they are survival. Psychology calls this attachment conditioning. The nervous system shapes itself around the responses of our caregivers. The brain learns which versions of you receive warmth and which versions are met with coldness. And so the ego is formed not as an enemy, but as a protector. It says, let me handle this. Let me keep you safe. Let me hide the parts of you that once felt too vulnerable. And for a while, it works. You are praised for being mature, helpful, responsible. But beneath that praise, something softer begins to fade. Because the mask you learn to wear doesn't grow with you, it grows over you. The child inside remains unmet, unheard, unseen. And even now, as an adult, you may still be living by those early rules without realizing it. You believe you must earn love. You believe vulnerability is dangerous. You believe being your whole self is too much. To understand how this shapes the person you are today, we must look at how this childhood mask transforms into your adult identity, the character you're still playing without realizing it. Have you ever noticed how, even as an adult, you still feel the need to prove yourself? Not loudly, not dramatically, but in subtle ways, the way you correct someone when they misunderstand you, the way you feel your chest tighten when you're ignored, the way you replay small moments of embarrassment long after everyone else has forgotten them. It's as if you are always on stage, performing a version of yourself you hope the world will accept. And somewhere deep inside, you worry that if the performance ever slips, the truth underneath will be judged as unworthy. This is the adult mask, the character you learned to play long ago but never stopped becoming. The responsible one, the quiet one, the strong one, the agreeable one, the one who never asks for too much, the one who always has an answer. You carry this character like armor, believing it protects you, but armor is heavy. You may not remember choosing it, but you feel the weight of it every day. You laugh a little softer when you feel insecure. You speak carefully, choosing words that won't offend. You tell stories in a way that makes you appear confident, capable, put together, even when you feel anything but. You do not lie. You simply shape yourself into something that feels safe. And yet, safety is a strange prison. The mask looks polished from the outside, but inside there is a quiet suffocation. There are moments when the mask cracks, when you feel jealousy rise like heat under your skin because someone else is praised, when someone corrects you and you feel the instinct to defend yourself, not because the point matters, but because your identity feels threatened. When someone gets close to you, close enough to see your softness, and suddenly you pull back. The ego fears being seen more than it fears being alone. Social media only reinforces the performance. You share images of who you want to be, not who you are. You curate your expressions, your words, your presence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you forget where the performance ends and where the real you begins. You become the mask, and the mask becomes you. But beneath the polished surface, something else is happening. A quiet ache, a sense of disconnection, a feeling that no matter how much you do, no matter how well you perform, something remains unmet. That is the child beneath the armor, still waiting to be allowed to exist without earning love first. To truly understand why this mask feels so necessary, why it can feel terrifying to let it fall, we need to look not just at memory, but at the brain itself, at how the mind learns to protect identity as though it were protecting life. This leads us into the psychology and science behind the ego's survival instinct. Have you ever wondered why it feels so threatening to be wrong, embarrassed, or misunderstood. Not just uncomfortable, but almost like a small death. It's because, to the brain, identity is not just a story. It is survival. The mind treats the self you present to the world as something that must be protected at all costs. And when something challenges that self, even something small, your body reacts as if it is under attack. Carl Jung called this outer self, the persona, the mask you show the world. Beneath it lies the shadow, the parts of you that learn to stay hidden. Freud described the ego as the mediator between your desires and the expectations of the world around you. And modern neuroscience adds another dimension to this understanding: the default mode network. This is the part of the brain that constantly tells you who you are, reminding you of your story, your memories, your role. It is the narrator in your mind that repeats, "This is me. This is how I must be." But here is the haunting part. The default mode network does not care if this story makes you happy. It only cares that the story stays intact. Your brain would rather keep you anxious in a familiar identity than allow you to step into an unknown one. This is why you cling to behaviors that no longer serve you, why you defend opinions you don't truly believe, why you stay small where you want to grow, silent where you want to speak. The ego is not trying to deceive you, it is trying to protect you. It remembers every time vulnerability brought pain, and it has learned to lock the doors of your emotional house tight. When someone challenges your viewpoint, your heart rate rises, your breathing shortens, your nervous system prepares for conflict, not because your belief was attacked, but because your sense of self was. Neuroscience shows that the brain processes social rejection in the same region that registers physical pain. The ego takes everything personally because, to the ego, everything is personal. And yet, this survival system comes with a cost. You remain confined within a very small version of yourself, one that was shaped by childhood, by fear, by moments you barely remember. The persona becomes a costume stitched together from old defenses. The shadow becomes a locked room filled with everything you were once afraid to feel. But awareness changes everything. The moment you begin to notice the ego acting, the defensiveness, the anxiety, the need to prove something shifts. You stop being the mask and begin to observe the mask. And once you can see the structure, you can begin to loosen its grip. But seeing the mask is only the beginning. The real turning point comes when the mask begins to crack, when the ego's protection becomes the very thing that suffocates you. That is where we now go. Have you ever felt like you were living behind glass? Everyone can see you, or at least the version of you they believe is real, but no one can touch the part of you that matters. There is a quiet ache that begins to grow when the mask you once built for protection becomes the very thing that traps you. You start to realize that the life you're performing is not the life you're living, and yet you keep performing because the ego whispers that without the performance, you will not survive. The ego is terrified of humiliation, terrified of being overlooked, terrified of being ordinary. It clings to identity like a lifeline. So when someone threatens your image simply by being better, louder, more admired, jealousy slithers in. Not because you dislike them, but because their existence feels like it cracks the mirror in which you've been trying to see yourself. You may feel your heart tighten when someone else succeeds, and you don't know why. You may feel unseen in a room of people, and you can't explain it. The ego believes that attention equals existence, and being ignored feels like erasure. This is where anxiety begins. You start monitoring every word you speak, every expression on your face. You worry about being misunderstood, being judged, being forgotten. You replay conversations not because you care about the details, but because your identity feels fragile in the memory. Your mind becomes an echo chamber, repeating your fears back to you, louder each time. And beneath all of this, something inside is screaming. A voice you learned to silence long ago. A voice that remembers who you were before the world taught you to hide. That voice feels like hunger, like longing, like a quiet grief. But the ego tells you to push it down, because if you ever let that voice speak, the mask might fall. And the ego believes that if the mask falls, you fall. This is why ego death feels like dying. The ego is not the self, but it believes it is. So when your defenses begin to collapse, when the persona begins to crack, your nervous system reacts as if your life is at risk. You feel fear, disorientation, confusion. You feel the world shift under your feet. You feel the glass castle shudder. And yet, something inside you knows the truth. You were never meant to live inside a castle made of mirrors. The collapse of the false self is not destruction, it is emergence. The beginning of remembering who you were before you learned to perform. But to reach that emergence, you must first understand the world that taught you to hold the mask so tightly in the first place. And that world is the culture that rewards the persona more than the person. Have you noticed how the modern world is built like a stage? Not a grand one with velvet curtains and golden balconies, but a subtle one made of screens, reflections, and watching eyes. Everywhere you go, you feel observed. Not directly, but indirectly, by expectations, by comparison, by the silent pressure to become someone. It is as though society has agreed that being yourself is not enough. You must present yourself. We live in a culture that teaches you to value the mask more than the face beneath it. Social media is a gallery of polished identities, carefully arranged, filtered, and edited until the person looks less like a human and more like an idea. You don't simply wake up anymore. You wake up to be seen. You don't simply enjoy a moment, you document it to prove that it mattered. Life becomes less about living and more about displaying evidence of living. And without noticing it, you begin to measure your worth through the eyes of others. Capitalism reinforces this conditioning from the beginning. Your value becomes tied to productivity, accomplishment, output. You are praised for the things you do, not the person you are. You learn to chase achievements, titles, roles, because the world rewards the performance. You become a brand without realizing it, curating your personality like a product. Even your uniqueness is expected to be marketable. You are told to stand out, be confident, make your mark. Yet everyone is being shaped by the same invisible mold. The command to be unique often results in imitation the same aesthetics, the same ambitions, the same hunger to be recognized. The world does not ask, "Who are you?" It asks, "How do you appear? How do you rank? How do you compare?" And so you learn to shine your mask while the person beneath it grows dimmer, quieter, almost forgotten. Confidence culture tells you to love yourself, but what it really means is love your image. The ego swells, not out of genuine security, but out of fear of being insignificant. And ironically, the louder the mask becomes, the lonelier the person beneath it feels. Like a statue polished to perfection but hollow inside. You begin to sense a void, a quiet sadness that creeps into moments that should feel full. You can be surrounded by applause and still feel unseen. You can be admired and still feel unloved, because the world falls in love with the mask and the real you remains untouched, breathing behind glass. This is where the emotional cost begins to reveal itself, the loneliness of being known everywhere and understood nowhere. And it is here, in this silence, that the consequences of ego attachment begin to show. Have you ever felt lonely while surrounded by people? Not the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone, but the kind that sits in your chest while you're laughing, talking, performing, the loneliness of being unseen. It is a strange kind of ache, quiet but heavy, like carrying a weight that no one knows you hold. Because how could they? They don't know you. They only know the mask. When you spend your life defending an identity, polishing it, maintaining it, you begin to realize how exhausting it truly is. You monitor your tone, your posture, your reactions. You carefully choose which parts of yourself to reveal and which to bury. You perform connection rather than experience it. You speak, but it doesn't feel like your voice. You laugh, but the sound feels distant. You are present, but not there. And slowly, a hollowness begins to grow like a room inside you that no one has ever entered. Relationships built on identity instead of truth always remain shallow. Even the ones that look deep from the outside feel strangely thin, like a painting of an ocean instead of the ocean itself. You can talk for hours, share jokes and memories, take photos and celebrate milestones, and still feel that no one has ever truly touched you. You ache not for company, but for recognition, not to be seen in the crowd, but to be seen in your silence. And so you begin to withdraw in subtle ways. You speak less openly, you share less vulnerably. You avoid moments where the real you might accidentally surface. You fear being understood, because being understood would require being exposed. The ego tells you that no one could love what lies beneath the surface, that the shadow is too messy, too emotional, too raw, so you keep the doors closed, and you call that safety. But safety has a cost. The nervous system is not designed to live in disguise. When you suppress your true self, your body interprets it as abandonment, self-abandonment. Studies in attachment psychology show that when your emotional truth is rejected, even by yourself, the brain responds with the same loneliness as losing someone you love. The grief you feel is not for others, it is for yourself, for the version of you that never had the chance to breathe. And perhaps that is the tragedy of the mask. It protects you from pain, but it also blocks you from love. It keeps you guarded, composed, admired, but never held. This is the quiet suffering that leads you to the edge of ego death. The moment where something inside whispers, there must be more than this. And there is but to reach. It, the mask, must first loosen. The self beneath must be allowed to rise. Have you ever felt the quiet urge to stop pretending? Not dramatically, not in some grand rebellion, but in a soft, tired way. A whisper inside you saying, I can't keep holding this together. It is not weakness, it is the beginning of truth. The ego does not collapse through force. It loosens when you become weary of carrying it. Ego death is not a moment of destruction. It is a gradual unlearning, a gentle peeling away of everything that is not yours. And it begins with noticing. The next time you feel yourself react, anger rising in your chest, jealousy burning under your skin, defensiveness sharpening your words, pause. Not to suppress the reaction, but to observe it. Ask yourself, who is feeling threatened right now? You might realize that it is not your true self that feels endangered. It is the mask. This awareness changes everything. Neuroscience shows that when you observe a thought rather than merge with it, the brain's emotional centers calm. The storm does not control you when you know you are watching it. Instead of drowning in emotion, you become the one who stands on the shore. But this path requires compassion, not judgment. The parts of you that cling, that defend, that fear, they are not your enemies. They were born in rooms where you once felt small, unheard, or unsafe. When the ego panics, it is the child inside you saying, please don't let me be hurt again. And so you do not fight the ego, you soothe it, you hold it. You let it know it no longer has to protect you alone. There will be moments when the mask tries to tighten again. That is natural. The ego does not die in a single breath. It learns to step aside, slowly, gently, one layer at a time. Some days you will feel expansive, open, real. Other days you will feel the old persona return like armor you no longer need, but still remember how to wear. Healing is not linear, it is cyclical, like waves returning to shore. Shadow integration begins when you let the parts of yourself you once rejected return home. The anger you were taught to fear, the softness you were taught to hide, the longing you tried to bury. These are not flaws, they are your depth. To let the false self fall apart is to allow the real self to breathe. And when this begins, even subtly, you will feel a shift, a quiet, unfamiliar peace, a presence that doesn't need to be proven, but the journey does not end here. Something waits beyond ego death, something deeper, quieter, and far more true. Now we arrive at the final threshold. What remains when the mask is finally gone? What if the person you have been searching for has been here all along, quiet, patient, waiting beneath the noise? There comes a moment, after the struggling, after the grasping, after the endless effort to maintain who you think you are, where something inside you softens, the performance slows, the defenses loosen, and you begin to sense a presence within yourself that feels older than your memories, older than your insecurities, older than the identity you spent a lifetime protecting. A presence that does not need to be seen to exist. When the mask begins to fall, you might expect a collapse, chaos, confusion, loss, but instead, you may feel something strangely gentle, like stepping into warm water, like exhaling after years of holding your breath. Because ego death is not the end of you, it is the end of the version of you that was built from fear. The self that remains is not dramatic. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't chase admiration or flee from disapproval. It simply is. A stillness like the surface of a lake untouched by wind. You begin to listen differently, not for how people perceive you, but for what is real inside you. You begin to speak differently, not to impress or prove, but to express what feels true. Even silence becomes different. It no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space. From this place, presence replaces performance. You no longer walk into a room hoping to be liked. You walk in simply being, and that is enough. Relationships deepen, not because you become more impressive, but because you become more open. You allow yourself to be seen gently, without the old fear that exposure means danger. And in being seen, you finally experience what intimacy was always meant to be. Two souls meeting without pretense. There is a humility here, but it is not weakness. It is strength that requires no defense. A quiet authority. A peace that cannot be given or taken by others. Neuroscience calls this the shift from ego identification to awareness, where the self is no longer the story, but the one witnessing the story unfold. You begin to understand that your worth does not rise or fall. It simply exists, steady, untouched, whole. And in that realization, something remarkable happens. The world no longer feels like a stage. You are no longer performing, you are living. You return to the child you once were, not the frightened one, but the original one. The one who existed before the first wound, before the first mask, before the first fear of being too much or not enough. And so the truth reveals itself, quietly, without force. When the ego dies, the self is finally born.